camera's rolling, so when you have a sec, just do a personal intro.
Okay.
Just like a quick name, what you do.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about sugar because we're getting close to picking.
Okay.
And go ahead.
My name is Janet Pauli. I'm one of the owners of Pauli Ranch. My husband and I own Pauli Ranch. We have 5 children. Most of them are very busy right now in the vineyards working for us. And we all have different jobs that we do. One of my jobs is checking sugars. This time of year, as we're getting closer to harvest, we have to know what the sugar levels are before we can come out and pick. This is Merlot. This is a variety called Merlot. And there's several ways that you can check sugars. Basically what we're doing is reading what's called a refractometer. So we're taking samples of juice and we're comparing the juice sample to just plain water. The difference between how light's refracted through that tells us what the sugar is. We have a conversion to sugar by doing that. So when I come out to sample, usually I'll either take bunch samples, so I might walk through this block and pick off a certain number of bunches representative of the crop and smash them up, crush them all up, take the juice to our lab, and we'll check the sugar. We also check the acid because that's an important component of winemaking. So the acid and the sugar, we like to have a balance there when we start picking. Another way of sampling, sometimes I'll just come and get berry samples. Berry samples I can do pretty quickly. I go and can test a lot of different bunches by taking a few berries from each bunch. On the outside, the inside, opposite sides of the road, so the shady side of the canopy, and that gives me a pretty representative sample. It's important to get the sample as accurate as you can. The winemaker is dependent on having the fruit come to the winery at its optimum. If it's too green, it's a problem. If it's too ripe, it's a problem. And so in terms of testing sugar, it's an important part of the process. We have a lot of cultural things that we do to help the vines. The leafy part of the vine is the canopy. Without these leaves, the grapes can't make sugar. So we manage canopies. Sometimes we have the canopies lifted up like on this trellis a little bit to get some air inside so we don't get botrytis starting in here where it starts to rot. We also cane cut some of them to let some more air in. And we also go through and we thin grapes, and we've been through here once and we'll probably do it again. So we might come through in a while and color thin this a little bit more. So we'd be taking off some of the greener bunches that aren't going to ripen in time so that we have a uniform crop when we come in to pick. Cultivation, irrigation, all of this is part of what we have to do to get the optimal ripening of the fruit so that we can make the best wine. Every year is a little bit different. Some years we have early rains. It gives us a problem with canopy management and starting botrytis. Sometimes earlier in the year we get humidity and that causes mildew to start, and we have to be able to manage canopy for that as well. So these are big healthy vines. You need a lot of leaves, a lot of healthy green leaves to grow a nice crop, and these vines are very balanced, and we're hoping we're going to make some beautiful Merlot out of this.
Rolling and action.
Okay. One thing that we do in canopy management and crop management is we'll come through, and we did this a little while ago, where we came through when we took off what was called second crop. So when the vines bloom in the springtime, you'll get a major bloom, and then sometimes later on you'll get a group of late flowers, clusters that come on, and they're way behind. Now these were taken off about 2 weeks ago now. These were bright green when we took these off, and they cut them off and put them on the ground. This was all what's called second crop. We don't want to have that in the grapes when they're harvested because they are far, far behind the regular fruit that we then leave for the harvest. And normally we can get away with just coming through one time and cutting off second crop. Sometimes you'll also get grapes that simply don't mature as quickly, and we might come through a second time to take off some fruit that's behind. But this crop now is looking pretty uniform. We'll be picking this probably in about 3 or 4 weeks, depending on what the weather does. And so it's a matter of just trying to get the balance between the leaf surface area and the amount of fruit that you have on the vine so you can get maximum sugar.
How much solar power is generated by each of these leaves, and you know, what's the optimum balance, and can you have too many leaves on for, you know, positive reasons for the vine's health? How do you play with that?
I think that in terms of, you can definitely have too few leaves because the vine has to have a way to make the sugar, and it can only do that by having a certain percentage of the surface area available to the sunshine. It doesn't really help you very much to have a lot of leaves in the center of the vine in the shade. And so we will go through, and we've also pulled leaves in here away from the clusters, not only to get the air through and help us keep it from rotting, but you really don't need that leaf surface on the inside in the shade. Surprisingly, actually, sunshine on the vines helps build the crop for the next couple of years. If there isn't enough sunshine on the wood, at some point in time, it becomes less fruitful. So even these buds that are underneath here have the primordial cell structure in them right now for next year's crop, and probably the crop after that. So it's very important how we manage these vines. If you have a block of young vineyard, doesn't have a big canopy, correspondingly you cannot leave a lot of fruit on this vine. It can't sugar it, can't physically sugar it. So if you have a good sized crop, you need a nice big canopy, you need to give it water, you need to fertilize it. It's pretty logical.
What can you tell right now about next year's crop?
I can't tell anything except that I know I have big healthy vines, and that's a really good sign. That tells me that, barring something unforeseen, probably we have at least the potential for a good crop next year. We're always pretty cautious as farmers to talk about things that haven't happened yet. But obviously these vines are healthy, they don't have any disease, they don't have any viruses, they don't have any insects, they don't have any root problems, at least nothing that's obvious here. And so I would say I'm really thrilled that I have this crop this year, and there's no reason for me not to expect to have this kind of a crop next year. This is a good spot.
There we go. Yeah, nice.
I can show you. Okay.
Camera's rolling in action. Go ahead.
With regard to irrigation, we have 2 systems in our vineyards. One is overhead sprinklers, and one is a drip system. We use the overhead sprinkler system in the springtime for frost protection. We're in an area here that's prone to frost. We don't have a good inversion layer, and so we use overhead sprinklers to put water onto the vineyard, basically coat the vines with ice, but not let them freeze. It acts like a coat of insulation. In the summertime, however, on these mature vines, we drip them. It's a very, very efficient way of putting water into the root zone. And for example, on a lot of our vines, our older vineyards, we'll put 2 emitters per vine. So there's a 1 emitter here and 1 emitter here. And when they're dripping, they're applying a certain amount of water per vine, per a period of time. So some of them are 1 gallon an hour, or they can be different. They can be at different rates, and there's different systems. There's different drip systems that you can put into place. We like to put 2 emitters per vine. Makes more sense for the vine to have roots out further than in simply very close to the trunk. Makes them better able to pick up moisture from the surrounding soil if it were to rain or something, particularly in the spring.
Talk about the soil. Loamy, rocky. I mean, it looks pretty gravelly. This is
pretty gravelly. We have everything across our vineyards, from a deep loam to, in some areas, a little bit of clay. This is a rocky, sort of gravelly bench. It's actually fantastic for growing grapes as long as you have enough water to put on them.
Talk about the term bench, because I've heard of a lot of bench, for instance, Zinfandels, coming from especially this northern area, you know, Cloverdale, Ukiah. Talk about the bench phenomenon, because
Okay.
I've always enjoyed the bench wines I've had.
Well, it's really variable. Bench really is sort of a geological term for an uplifted, one of two things has happened. Either the land has been uplifted technically, or there have been places where rivers have moved through and cut away land and left benches up higher. A lot of our best fruit, particularly our red grapes, are grown up on the bench ground. They tend to be usually a little less quality soil in terms of the amount of loamy material in them. They tend to be a little bit rockier. But if you have some water, and we actually do even grow some of our red grapes where we have no water, up on some of the high benches and some of the very old vineyards. We don't get the production that we see when we can add water to it. In the bottom ground, in the low ground, the valley floors, we tend to get deeper soils, loamy, beautiful, deep soils, very, very vigorous vines that sometimes we have to control the vigor on because they simply do grow too much, too fast. And we can put some larger crops on down there. But the carrying capacity of soil in terms of how it holds water differs dramatically. Even a single vineyard, you can have sections where you're watering one section more than you are another, simply because of the soil type.
Talk about the sugar. We're kind of coming down here to the final days before picking. Talk about brix, what you're seeing from these grapes and what you're going to be looking for at the moment you say, let's go.
Okay, well, most of those decisions are not made by us in the vineyard. They're made by our winemakers, but we try to keep the winemakers knowing and understanding what's happening out here. It's the end of August. Normally we would consider picking grapes, these red grapes, this Merlot, probably the third week of September or even until the middle of October, depending on how much of a crop we have. Right now, our sugars, I actually ran some sugars this morning on some Chardonnay, and they're running about 16 to 17. I would expect that this Merlot is less than that at this point in time, but I haven't run sugars on them recently. But when we get close, depending on what the winemaker wants, depending on what the acids look like, we would begin considering picking these when they get to about a brix of 24 to 25. That would be an optimum. Of course, you know, if you have a big field, if you have some variability across the field, you have to decide when you're going to pick that fruit so that you're getting an average sugar across the block. Sometimes we start picking and we stop, and we have to wait a little bit longer.
What's the difference between 16 and 24? What's each degree of brix mean?
It's simply a measurement. It would be like measuring a degree of temperature. Normally we would say on average you would gain, if your weather is pretty warm, not overly hot, nights are still cool, like around here our nights are usually in the 50s, our daytime temperature can be in the low hundreds, and we would expect under those circumstances to see about 2 degrees increase in brix a week. So if you're at 20 and you need 24, you can say I've got about 2 weeks before I'd be picking this. So that's a little bit about how we as a vineyardist can decide where we're going to be picking next, to get our crews together, to get our equipment together, to make sure that we're ready to go when the fruit's ready.